Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on Ghost Recon Phantoms, also known as Ghost Recon Online when it was back during its beta, which was a couple of years ago actually. It finally saw a full-on release as Ghost Recon Phantoms in April of this year. And so it was in beta for a couple of years. It's kind of weird how that worked out actually, because what I'm playing now as Ghost Recon Phantoms really feels almost exactly the same as Ghost Recon Online, the beta. Down to everything, including the free-to-play model. They did add some things here and there. They have thrown in a lot more of the monetization stuff now. And it's generally a bit more polished. Obviously, they've ironed out some of the technical problems, not all of them. It still runs like total crap on dual cores, and you still have a really, really weird sound glitch on dual core processors. But other than that, they haven't really had any major issues like you would see during the early beta stages, like crashes or things like that. There are some issues with matchmaking still. It's very, very slow, and usually it puts you in a kind of laggy game, which is a shame. I mean, it does run on peer-to-peer matchmaking, it seems. Obviously matchmaking, but I don't know if it's peer-to-peer. It feels like it's peer-to-peer as far as the lag goes. But let's go ahead and get the presentation out of the way, because you look at this thing, it is not appealing to the eye at all. It looks like something that came out a few years ago, actually. And so you're dealing with a lot of pretty low-res textures. The modeling's decent. The animations are serviceable, really. There's nothing really impressive about them. And some of them look downright goofy. The environments are decently detailed, but again, low-res textures makes it look rather ugly, and they've really gone for that brown and gray and realistic color scheme that they seem hell-bent on these days, even though this is a very Flight of Fancy kind of game, as in, you've got a lot of sci-fi stuff. I mean, you got guys with optical camo, aka cloaking, and weird magnetic shields that deflect bullets and things like that. And yet they're still going for the brown and gray and realistic crap. Seriously, guys? Come on. At any rate, the sound design is also something that bothers me. There's not really much in the way of voice acting, so there's not really much to speak of there. The music, back during the beta, it was pretty much just recycled from other Ghost Recon games. Now it has its own stuff, but it's very, very typical Tom Clancy style music that doesn't really go anywhere. It's certainly not the memorable tracks that you would have in earlier Ghost Recon and Rainbow Six games. I mean, you think about Rainbow Six, it has a very iconic theme. You think about Ghost Recon, at least the original, and it had some kind of iconic music. This doesn't really have any of that, so it just feels like it's imitating rather than actually a part of. And then there's the sound effects. Oh, the sound effects are bad in this game. They have really weird reverb effects all over all of the weapon fire, so all of the guns sound ridiculous. They echo like crazy, and you have a hard time actually figuring out what they actually sound like. Some of them, they use stock sounds, and they just threw a lot of reverb effects over them to make them sound slightly different. It ends up sounding terrible. They tended to go for the loud, almost high-pitched weapons fire rather than the bass with these. So you end up having some sounds that are really loud, and they kind of hurt your ears actually, but they don't have that really satisfying bass to them that you would expect in a lot of FPSs and third-person shooters as well. But that's really not the main issue I have with Ghost Recon Phantoms. Obviously, it's a multiplayer game. There's no story whatsoever. So, what's the gameplay like? Well, it is a third-person tactical shooter to some degree, but they didn't really emphasize the tactical part of it. You get 3 classes, each of which has a set of abilities. Like Recon, for instance, uses sniper rifles and submachine guns. They have the cloaking ability. and they're generally the lightly armored run-around scout, get behind enemy lines, pick enemies off from long range, that sort of thing. The support class is the one with the light machine guns, as well as the cool ballistic shield thingy that I mentioned before, with that has that magnetic shield that charges up and then it deflects bullets. The assault class has assault rifles, obviously, and shares shotguns with the support class.
Losing Charlie.
And they get a it's sort of like a riot shield, but they charge with it, and they can knock enemies down with it. But other than that, they're really just your general infantry class, and that's mostly how people use them. It is a cover-based shooter, and you do actually get a lot of numbers in this game, which is nice. It does tell you exactly how much damage your weapon does. It does tell you exactly what insert attachment here does to insert weapon here, and that sort of thing. You get to see the numbers as your control goes up or down, and so on and so forth, with all the various weapons and the various sets of equipment. So that it's nice that they've thrown that in there to tell you exactly what every upgrade does. But there's some problems with it. You see, weapon handling is very basic. If you're in cover, you're more accurate when you're out of when you're out of cover, which makes a bit of sense, I guess. You're more stable once you're in cover. You have a defensive bonus while you're in cover, and it tells you those actually when you jump into cover, which is nice. You can cycle through your stances, standing, prone, and crouched, even when you're in cover, which is also nice. And there's a surprising bit of mobility. The problem I've had with it is that sometimes you get locked up on terrain, and you end up getting killed by it. By that I mean you'll take cover, and then somebody will come at you at an angle you can't actually react to, and they can see you even though you can't actually aim at them, and so they just annihilate you. Things like that get very annoying. Admittedly, that happens with pretty much any cover-based shooter out there, so it's not just a problem with Phantoms, but it gets very annoying in this, where the game effectively becomes pay to win. See, once you're out of the up to level 4 area, once you get your classes, one of your classes up to level 4, you're thrown into the, okay, now you should be good enough to deal with the much higher level than you people out there who have way better weaponry than you do, way better equipment than you do, etc. They seem to assume you can just deal with it, even though you're still dealing with your entry-level gear. Now, they do give you the Tier 1 stuff once you've leveled up sufficiently. It's level 5 or 6, I believe. You get your Tier 1 primary of choice, which is either the, say if you're using the Recon class. Once you level that up sufficiently, it's like, oh, do you want this sniper rifle, or do you want this submachine gun? And then you pick one, and then it gives you that for free. But from then on out, it's basically, okay, now you need to buy everything, which is either bought with real money, which is the gold coins you see, or you can buy it with the in-game currency that you earn, which you earn at a rate of maybe 300 or 400 per game if you do well. If you don't do well, then you're going to earn less. Bear in mind that the cheapest thing that I could find as far as your actual use of weapons goes was the Tier 1 pistol, which is 1,000 of the in-game currency that you earn. So just to do that, you need to win and do well in basically 3 or 4 matches. Keep in mind that to get into a match, you have to sit there at the matchmaking for a good 2, 3, 4 minutes while it tries to find you a game. Even if there's a lot of people playing the game, it's going to have a hard time actually putting together a game. So that's tedious. Then the games themselves last a good 20 minutes, maybe more. And again, you have to do well to earn a lot of the in-game currency. So it becomes very, very grindy. And when you have people who have played it for a while and thus have better gear, or people who just straight up bought the better gear, and you have to unlock new tiers of weapons by buying the previous tier of weapons, and you have to buy things like armor and your various consumables like grenades. Yes, you have to buy those, and so on and so forth. It becomes very, very clear that they didn't really think too much on the balancing, or if they did, they didn't care. Because unless you actually put proper money into the game, or you just put a ridiculous amount of time and effort into the game, you are going to be at a disadvantage. Particularly when you have weapons that are just straight up better than what you have being on the receiving end. Say, for instance, you got someone who has leveled up their recon kit a bit, just a bit, I might add, and has unlocked the P90. Well, you're pretty much screwed because that thing's pretty overpowered. Especially if they get behind enemy lines, which is pretty easy to do when they're cloaked. So, you're going to find that the game is pretty unfair. And if you get better gear and do well in the game, then obviously you're going to be enjoying it a bit. But even then, even though this is supposed to be a tactical shooter, people don't really work as a team. There's not really much communication going on in this thing at all. And you really do have to rely on your teammates to help you out when capturing points and things like that. And when they're not doing that, or they just are terrible, or they're under-leveled, well, you're pretty much screwed. So, Ghost Recon Phantoms becomes more frustrating than anything else. It becomes effectively pay-to-win, which is infuriating. Everyone hates pay-to-win, for good reason. And it just wears on you. Once you get out of the early levels of the game and get into the basically the big pool, then you find that your enjoyment of the game is going to drop off pretty dramatically. Those first couple of levels are actually not that bad. It's kind of tedious. I've played a lot better, I've played a lot worse, but those first few levels, when you're stuck with basically the entry-level gear, it's not too bad. Then you get thrown into this area with all of the people who've leveled up and have better gear than you, and suddenly it becomes apparent that the game is just not enjoyable at all. So there you go, folks. I would recommend avoiding Ghost Recon Phantoms. Thanks for watching.